I didn't expect it to happen like that. Not in front of everyone, not in a room full of people who had known me for years, and definitely not from her, my younger sister. It was supposed to be a normal evening, family gathered, voices overlapping, plates moving, soft laughter filling the room. Nothing unusual, nothing tense. At least, that's what I thought. I remember sitting there, listening to conversations drift from one topic to another. People were relaxed, comfortable, but something felt slightly off. Not obvious, not enough to question, just a feeling, the kind you notice but ignore. I glanced across the table. She was there, smiling, talking, acting like everything was normal, and for a moment I told myself it was, because the last thing you expect is for something to shift in a room like that. But then it happened. It started small, a comment, light enough that someone else might have missed it, but I didn't, because it was about me. I looked up. She wasn't looking at me yet. She was still speaking to someone else, like she hadn't just crossed a line. I told myself to let it go. Maybe I misunderstood. Maybe it wasn't meant the way it sounded. That's what we do sometimes. We give people the benefit of the doubt, even when something doesn't sit right. But then she said it again, this time louder, clear enough that the people around her stopped talking, and now everyone could hear it. I felt it immediately, the shift. You know that moment when a room changes but no one announces it? That's what it was. Conversations slowed, eyes started moving. People weren't speaking, but they were listening. And then she looked at me, directly. No confusion, no hesitation, like she wanted me to hear it, like she needed everyone else to hear it too. What I'm saying is, her voice steady, almost casual, is some people pretend to be something they're not. There it was. Not loud, not aggressive, but sharp enough to land exactly where it was meant to. And suddenly, I wasn't just sitting at the table anymore. I was the focus. No one said my name, but they didn't need to, because everyone understood. I could feel it in the way the room went still, in this way people avoided looking directly at me, but didn't look away either. That uncomfortable middle ground where something has been said and no one knows what to do with it. For a second, I didn't move, not because I didn't hear her, but because I did, and I needed to understand something. Was this intentional, or was this one of those moments that just got out of control? But then she leaned back in her chair, calm, composed, like she had just said something completely normal. And that's when I knew. This wasn't accidental. This wasn't a slip. This was planned. And whatever she thought she was exposing about me, she believed it. Or worse, she wanted everyone else to believe it too. I slowly placed my hands on the table, steady, controlled, because reacting too quickly would have made it emotional, and this wasn't going to be emotional, not for me. I looked around the room, faces I knew, people I had spent years with, and yet no one spoke, no one interrupted, no one corrected her. They just watched, waiting, and that's when something shifted inside me. Not anger, not embarrassment, something else. Clarity, because at that moment I understood exactly what was happening. This wasn't just a comment, this was a statement, a message, and it was being delivered in front of everyone for a reason. I took a slow breath, lifted my eyes, and looked directly at her, because if she thought I was going to sit there and let her define me in front of everyone, she was about to realize something. I don't stay silent. I didn't respond right away, not because I didn't have anything to say, but because I wanted to understand what she was doing, because there's a difference between a careless comment and something meant to land, and what she said, that landed. The room didn't go back to normal. That was the first sign. Usually, after something awkward, people recover quickly. Someone changes the subject, someone laughs, someone moves things forward. But this time, no one did. The energy stayed exactly where it was. Tense, quiet, watching. I could feel it without looking up. That weight in the air when people are waiting to see what happens next. I kept my posture steady, didn't rush, didn't react, because reacting too fast would have given her control, and I wasn't going to give her that. I reached for my glass slowly, just to give myself a moment, a second to observe, a second to think, and that's when I noticed something. She wasn't nervous, not even slightly. She was calm, too calm, like she had already decided how this moment was going to play out, like she wasn't worried about what I might say. And that told me everything, because people don't speak like that in front of others unless they believe they're backed by something or someone. I glanced around the table, not obvious, just enough, and what I saw confirmed it. The looks, the way some people avoided eye contact, the way others were watching a little too closely, not confused, not surprised, just aware. That's when the thought hit me. This didn't start here. This wasn't the first time something like this had been said. It just happened to be the first time it was said in front of me. I felt my grip tighten slightly around the glass, not out of anger, out of realization. Because if this had already been talked about, then what she just did wasn't random, it was a continuation. And suddenly, everything started making sense. The small moments I had ignored before, the subtle changes in how people spoke to me, the conversations that ended when I walked in, the way certain things just felt off. I hadn't imagined it. I had just been late to it. I set the glass back down gently, careful, controlled, because now I wasn't trying to figure out if something was wrong. I knew something was wrong. The question was how far it had gone. She shifted slightly in her seat, still relaxed, still composed, but now watching me, waiting. And that's when I realized something else. This wasn't just about saying something. This was about seeing what I would do next. She had put something out there, and now she was measuring my reaction, waiting to see if I would stay quiet, if I would let it sit, if I would let everyone else decide who I was based on what she said. I looked back at her, not aggressively, not emotionally, just directly, because I wasn't going to give her confusion. I wasn't going to give her any hesitation, but I also wasn't going to rush, not yet, because the moment you respond, you step into it, and once you step into it, there's no going back. I leaned back slightly in my chair, took a slow breath, and let the silence sit just long enough, not uncomfortable, not dragged out, just enough for everyone to feel it, because now the room wasn't just watching her, they were watching me, and what I did next was going to matter, because whatever she thought she had started, she hadn't finished it, not yet, and I was about to decide. I kept my eyes on her for a moment, then looked away, not because I was backing down, but because I didn't need to rush into anything. Not yet. Because now that I understand this wasn't random, I needed to understand how far it had gone. The room was still quiet, not completely silent, but close enough. You could hear small movements, a glass being set down,
a chair shifting slightly, but no one was speaking. And that silence said more than anything else. Because if what she said was out of place, someone would have corrected it. If it was a misunderstanding, someone would have stepped in, but no one did. And that told me everything I needed to know. This wasn't new to them. I shifted slightly in my seat and glanced toward the others at the table. Still not obvious, just enough to observe. And this time, I saw it more clearly. The way two people exchanged a quick look, the way someone lowered their eyes the moment mine passed over them. The way another person leaned back, like they didn't want to be too close to whatever this was. It wasn't fear, it wasn't confusing, it was awareness. And that's when the first real crack formed, because it wasn't just about what she said anymore. It was about what everyone else already believed. I felt something settle in my chest. Not panic, not anger, something heavier, understanding. Because when something like this spreads quietly, it doesn't stay small, it grows. From one conversation to another, from one assumption to something people start accepting as truth. And by the time it reaches a room like this, it's no longer a question, it's a conclusion. I leaned forward slightly, resting my hands together, calm, controlled. Because now I wasn't trying to figure out if something was wrong, I was trying to figure out what exactly had been said. What version of me had been passed around when I wasn't there? I let my eyes move across the table again, slower this time, and something else stood out. No one looked surprised, not even a little. That was the part that stayed with me, because surprise is honest, you can't fake it, and there was none. Just quiet acceptance, like what she said matched something they had already heard. That's when it became clear. This didn't start tonight. This didn't start at this table. This had been moving quietly long before I walked into this room, and I had missed it. Or maybe I had seen pieces of it and chose not to question it. Because sometimes it's easier to believe everything is fine than to face the possibility that it isn't. I took a slow breath, not to calm myself, but to steady my thoughts. Because now reacting emotionally would have been the wrong move. Emotion would have made it look like I was defending something, and I wasn't there to defend myself against something I didn't even fully understand yet. I was there to uncover it. I looked back at her. She was still watching me, still composed, still waiting. And that's when I noticed something I hadn't seen before. Confidence. Not loud, not obvious, but there. The kind of confidence that comes from thinking you're in control of the situation. Like she believed whatever she said was already strong enough to stand on its own. Like she didn't need to explain it, because in her mind, everyone already understood. And that was the moment everything shifted. Because now I wasn't just dealing with a comment, I was dealing with something that had already taken shape, something that had already been spread, something that had already been accepted without me even knowing it existed. I leaned back slightly again, took another slow breath, and made a decision. I wasn't going to guess anymore. I wasn't going to sit there and let this build around me without knowing exactly what it was. Because whatever she thought she had control over, whatever she thought she had already established in that room, I was about to step into it. And this time, I wasn't going to let it stay hidden. I looked at her again. This time, I didn't look away. Because whatever this was, it had gone far enough. The room was still holding that same tension. No one speaks, no one stepped in, just waiting. And that's when she moved. Not dramatically, just enough to draw attention back to herself. She adjusted in her chair, glanced around the table, then let out a small breath, like she was about to say something that needed to be said. "I mean, let's be honest," she started. Her tone wasn't loud, it wasn't aggressive, but it carried. The kind of voice that doesn't need volume to reach everyone in the room. A few heads lifted slightly. People who had been avoiding eye contact were now listening again, and I already knew whatever came next wasn't going to be small. She shook her head lightly, like she was disappointed. She continued, "I've been quiet about this for a while, but at some point, things need to be said." There it was, confirmation. This wasn't new. This had been building, and she had chosen this moment, these people, to bring it out. I kept my expression steady, didn't interrupt, because I needed her to say it, fully, clearly, in front of everyone. She looked directly at me now. The way another person leaned back, like they didn't want to be too close to whatever this was. It wasn't fear, it wasn't confusing, it was awareness. And that's when the first real crack formed, because it wasn't just about what she said anymore. It was about what everyone else already believed. I felt something settle in my chest. Not panic, not anger, something heavier, understanding. Because when something like this spreads quietly, it doesn't stay small, it grows. From one conversation to another, from one assumption to something people start accepting as truth. And by the time it reaches a room like this, it's no longer a question, it's a conclusion. I leaned forward slightly, resting my hands together, calm, controlled. Because now I wasn't trying to figure out if something was wrong, I was trying to figure out what exactly had been said. What version of me had been passed around when I wasn't there? I let my eyes move across the table again, slower this time, and something else stood out. No one looked surprised, not even a little. That was the part that stayed with me, because surprise is honest, you can't fake it, and there was none. Just quiet acceptance, like what she said matched something they had already heard. That's when it became clear. This didn't start tonight. This didn't start at this table. This had been moving quietly long before I walked into this room, and I had missed it. Or maybe I had seen pieces of it and chose not to question it. Because sometimes it's easier to believe everything is fine than to face the possibility that it isn't. I took a slow breath, not to calm myself, but to steady my thoughts. Because now reacting emotionally would have been the wrong move. Emotion would have made it look like I was defending something, and I wasn't there to defend myself against something I didn't even fully understand yet. I was there to uncover it. I looked back at her. She was still watching me, still composed, still waiting, and that's when I noticed something I hadn't seen before. Confidence. Not loud, not obvious, but there. The kind of confidence that comes from thinking you're in control of the situation. Like she believed whatever she said was already strong enough to stand on its own. Like she didn't need to explain it, because in her mind, everyone already understood. And that was the moment everything shifted, because now I wasn't just dealing with a comment, I was dealing with something that had already taken shape, something that had already been spread, something that had already been accepted without me even knowing it existed. I leaned back slightly again, took another slow breath, and made a decision. I wasn't going to guess anymore. I wasn't going to sit there and let this build around me without knowing exactly what it was. Because whatever she thought she had control over, whatever she thought she had already established in that room, I was about to step into it. And this time, I wasn't going to let it stay hidden. I looked at her again. This time, I didn't look away. Because whatever this was, it had gone far enough. The room was still holding that same tension. No one speaks, no one stepped in, just waiting. And that's when she moved. Not dramatically, just enough to draw attention back to herself. She adjusted in her chair, glanced around the table, then let out a small breath, like she was about to say something that needed to be said. "I mean, let's be honest," she started. Her tone wasn't loud, it wasn't aggressive, but it carried. The kind of voice that doesn't need volume to reach everyone in the room. A few heads lifted slightly. People who had been avoiding eye contact were now listening again, and I already knew whatever came next wasn't going to be small. She shook her head lightly, like she was disappointed. She continued, "I've been quiet about this for a while, but at some point, things need to be said." There it was, confirmation. This wasn't new, this had been building, and she had chosen this moment, these people, to bring it out. I kept my expression steady, didn't interrupt, because I needed her to say it, fully, clearly, in front of everyone. She looked directly at me now.
No one was asking questions. No one was saying, "Wait, that doesn't sound right." They were just watching. And that's when something shifted inside me, because it wasn't just about what she was saying anymore. It was about what they were willing to believe. I looked down at my hands for a brief second, then back up again, because a memory came to me. Not forced, not dramatic, just there. A conversation I had with her not long ago. We were alone, no tension, no pressure, just talking. And she had asked me something, simple, but now it felt different. She asked, "Why do people always listen to you?" At the time, I didn't think much of it. I gave her a normal answer, told her I didn't know. Maybe it was just the way I explained things. Maybe people trusted me. She smiled when I said that. But now, sitting there in that room, that smile meant something else. Because it wasn't a curiosity, it was a comparison. I blinked slowly and looked back at her, because now I could see it. Not clearly before, but now it was there. This wasn't just about something I said. This was about how she saw me, and maybe how others saw me too. I straightened slightly in my seat, because once you understand the root of something, you stop reacting to the surface. And what she was doing right now was surface. There was something deeper behind it, something that had been building quietly, and now it had found a moment to come out in front of everyone. I looked around the table one more time, and this time I wasn't searching for reactions. I was reading them. The silence, the stillness, the lack of interruption. It all pointed to one thing. They didn't know the full truth. They only knew what they had been told, and that meant something important. This wasn't finished, not even close, because whatever version of me had been passed around in quiet conversations was about to meet the real one. I placed my hands back on the table, steady, controlled, because now I wasn't just sitting in the moment anymore. I was stepping into it, and whatever she thought she had built, whatever she thought she had already established in that room, I was about to start taking it apart, piece by piece, right in front of everyone. I didn't rush to speak, not yet, because now that I understood what was happening, I needed to decide how I was going to handle it. Not react, decide. There's a difference. Reacting is emotional, deciding is controlled. And control was exactly what I needed at that moment. I looked at her again. She was still sitting there, arms crossed, expression steady. But something had changed. It was subtle, easy to miss if you weren't paying attention, but I was. The confidence she had earlier wasn't as strong anymore. It was still there, but it wasn't as certain, because now I wasn't quiet, and she could feel that. I let my eyes move across the table one more time, slower this time, and what I saw confirmed it. The room had shifted. Not completely, but enough. People weren't as relaxed as before. Some leaned back, some avoided eye contact, others watched more carefully, because now they weren't just listening to her, they were waiting for me, and that changes everything. I placed my hands flat on the table, not forcefully, just enough to ground myself in the moment.
because this wasn't just about clearing my name. This was about something bigger, respect. And once that's questioned in front of others, you don't get it back by staying silent. You get it back by standing firm. I leaned forward slightly.
Met her eyes, and this time I didn't hold back. "If you're going to say something about me," I said, "then say it clearly." My voice wasn't loud, but it didn't need to be. It carried. The room tightened again. That same quiet pressure, but it's different now, because this time it wasn't uncertain. It was anticipation. She didn't answer immediately, and that hesitation said more than anything she had said so far, because earlier she spoke easily, confidence, certain, but now she had to be specific, and specifics are where things fall apart. I held her gaze, didn't look away, didn't rush her, because I wasn't going to fill the space for her. She had created this moment, now she had to stand in it. She shifted slightly in her chair, uncrossed her arms, then crossed them again. Small movement, but it mattered, because it showed something. She wasn't as comfortable anymore. "Everyone here knows what I'm talking about," she said finally. There it was again, avoiding clarity, leaning on assumption, trying to keep control without saying anything concrete, but I wasn't going to let that stand. "No," I replied calmly, "they don't." That landed, because now the room had to choose, stay in assumption or move toward truth. I leaned in just slightly more, not aggressive, just a present. "Say it," I added. Two simple words, but they carried weight, because now there was no space left to hide, no room for vague statements, no way to pass responsibility to the room. It was on her, and she knew it. The silence stretched just enough to be felt, not long, not uncomfortable, but enough, because now everyone was watching the same thing. Would she say it or not? And in that moment, the control she thought she had was no longer hers. She held my gaze for a moment longer, just a second, but it was enough, because I could see it now, that hesitation she didn't have before, that small crack in her confidence. And once that shows, it doesn't go away. The room was completely still, no movement, no side conversations, nothing. Everyone was locked into the moment, waiting, watching, because now it wasn't just tension anymore. It was a line, and she was standing right on it. I didn't move, didn't speak again, because I had already said what needed to be said. Now it was her turn. She let out a small breath, not dramatic, just enough to show that whatever she was about to say wasn't as easy as before. Then she looked around the table, quick, almost instinctive, like she was checking, looking for support, looking for someone to confirm what she was about to say. But no one stepped in, no one nodded, no one helped her, and that's when it happened. She looked back at me, and this time she said it. "You've been telling people things that aren't true," she said, "making yourself look better than you are." Clear, direct, out loud. No more hiding behind half statements, no more letting the room fill in the blanks. It was there now, in front of everyone. I nodded once, slow, because now we finally had something real, something that could be addressed. "Like what?" I asked. Calm, steady, no emotion in my voice, because this wasn't about defending myself. This was about exposing what she couldn't prove. She hesitated again, and that hesitation grew, because now she needed details, and details require truth. "I've heard things," she said, "from people." There it was, Not facts, not evidence, just words passed from one person to another. I held her gaze, didn't let it go. Who? I asked. One word, simple, but it carried weight, because now we were moving deeper, and she knew it. Another pause, longer this time, because now there was pressure, not from me, from the moment itself, from the room, from the expectation that had built up. She shifted again, her posture tightening slightly. I don't need to name anyone, she said. And that was it. That was the moment everything turned, because the second you can't stand behind what you're saying, it starts to fall apart. I nodded slowly, not surprised, because I had already seen it coming. This is what you've been doing? I said calmly, repeating things you can't even stand behind? That landed. You could feel it, not loudly, but clearly. A few people shifted. Someone looked down, because now it wasn't just about me anymore. It was about what had been said and how weak it actually was. I leaned back slightly, still calm, still controlled. You made a statement in front of everyone, I continued, so let's be clear about it. No emotion, just direction. What exactly are you accusing me of? There was no avoiding it now, no redirecting, no softening, just a direct line between what she said and what she needed to prove. She opened her mouth slightly, then closed it, and that silence said everything, because now the room could see it, not just me, everyone. This wasn't true. This was an assumption, and once assumption is exposed, it loses its power. I looked around the table, not searching, just confirming, and I saw it, the shift. The same people who had been quiet before were no longer as certain, because doubt had entered the room, and doubt changes everything. I looked back at her, and this time I didn't need to say anything else, because the moment had already spoken, and whatever control she thought she had when she started this was gone. I didn't raise my voice. I didn't repeat myself, because I didn't need to. The moment had already done the work. She had said enough, and more importantly, she hadn't been able to back it up, and everyone saw it. Not all at once, but slowly. You could feel it, the shift. The same people who had been quiet before were no longer looking at me the same way anymore. Now they were looking at her, not openly questioning, not confronting, but watching. And that's where everything changes, because once attention moves, control moves with it. I stayed where I was, calm, steady, not trying to prove anything, because the truth doesn't need to be pushed, it just needs to stand. She adjusted in her seat again, but this time it wasn't subtle. It was uncomfortable. Her arms dropped slightly. Her posture changed, and for the first time that night, she didn't look certain. She looked unsure. I let a second pass. Then I spoke, not loudly, not emotionally, just clearly. If you're going to speak about me in front of people, I said, then it should be based on something real. That landed, because now it wasn't just about what she said, it was about how she said it, and she didn't have to support it. I leaned forward slightly, just enough to hold the moment. I don't deal in assumptions, I continued, and I don't answer to things that can't be proven. Simple, direct, and impossible to twist. The room didn't stay the same after that. You could see it, in the way people shifted, on the way someone finally looked up. In this way, the silence wasn't protecting her anymore. It was questioning her. And that's when something else happened. Not loud, not dramatic, but important. Someone spoke, quietly,
I don't think we've ever heard anything like that before. It wasn't directed at me, it wasn't directed at her, it was just said. But it mattered, because it broke the pattern. The silence wasn't unified anymore. And once that breaks, everything else follows. Another person shifted, then another. Small movements, but they added up. Because now, people weren't just sitting in the moment, they were rethinking it. She noticed it too. Of course she did. Because now, the room wasn't holding her up anymore. It was pulling back. And without that support, what she said didn't carry the same weight. I sat back slightly, not retreating, just settled, because I didn't need to push further. Not yet. The moment was already working. The truth had already entered the room. And once it's there, it doesn't leave quietly. It stays. It lingers. It forces people to reconsider what they thought they knew. I looked at her one more time, not with anger, not with frustration, just clarity. Because now I understood something fully. This wasn't about exposing me. This was about her trying to control how others saw me. And now that control is gone. Not taken, not forced, lost. Because once something false is questioned in front of everyone, it can't stand the same way again. And she knew it. I didn't need to say anything else, because the moment had already turned. And this time, it wasn't against me anymore. No one spoke right away, not because there was nothing left to say, but because everything had already been said. And now it was just sitting there, clear, unavoidable. I looked around the table one last time. The same people who had been watching earlier. Now it looked different, not in who they were, but in what they understood. Because once doubt enters a situation like that, it changes how everything is seen. I didn't feel the need to explain myself. I didn't feel the need to defend anything, because the truth had already done what it needed to do. It had shown itself, without effort, without noise, and that was enough. I slowly pushed my chair back and stood up, not in a rush, not in frustration, just done. The room stayed quiet as I stepped away from the table. No one stopped me. No one tried to fix the moment, because there was nothing left to fix. What had been said had already been revealed for what it was. I picked up my things calmly,
Adjusted my jacket, and for a second, I paused. Not to look back, but to recognize something. I had walked into that room expecting a normal evening, and walked out understanding something completely different. Not about them, about myself. Because moments like that don't just show you who people are, they show you how quickly things can change when someone decides to speak without truth. I took a slow breath and headed toward the door. Each step felt lighter than the last, not because the situation was easy, but because it was clear, and clarity removes weight. Before I reached the door, I stopped briefly, not because I needed to, but because I wanted to say one more thing. Not loudly, not to the whole room, just enough. If you ever have something to say about me, I said calmly, say it to me. No anger, no tension, just truth. I didn't wait for a response. I didn't need one, because I already knew something they were just beginning to realize. Respect isn't something you ask for, it's something you stand in. And once you do, people either meet you there or they don't. I opened the door and stepped outside. The air felt different, quieter, cleaner. And for the first time that night, I didn't feel like watching it. I felt free. Because I didn't leave that room with less than I walked in with.
I left with more clarity, more understanding, and something even stronger than that: control. Not over them, not over what they believed, but over how I carried myself, no matter what was said. And that was something no one in that room could take from me. Not with words, not with silence, not even with doubt. Because once you know who you are, you don't need a room full of people to confirm it. And as I walked away, I didn't feel humiliated. I felt certain. And that made all the difference. I keep thinking about that moment, not what she said, but how easily people were ready to believe it. Because the truth is, it only takes one voice to start something, but it takes strength to stand in front of it. So let me ask you something. If you were in that room and someone close to you spoke about you like that, would you stay quiet? Or would you speak up right there? Tell me in the comments. I read every single one. And if stories like this speak to you, stories about truth, betrayal, and standing your ground, subscribe to Quiet Voice of Her Life, because sometimes the quietest voice in the room is the one that carries the most power.